Welcome to the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best founders and investors to help you scale a business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is a very special one. His name is Ed, the co-founder at Velvet. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
It's a pleasure. And you have an amazing story. You have founded companies 2 times. You are an angel investor. You also have your own fund, and you have also a global overview, even in the amount of languages that you speak. But for the ones who didn't have the pleasure to meet you yet, what about introducing yourself and letting us know more about you?
Sure. Thank you. Well, I'm French born, was living in Paris and in the south of France until I was 11 years old. And then I moved to Brazil. My mother's Brazilian. So I arrived in the early 90s in São Paulo, moving from the south of France. So quite a shock, as you can imagine. But I, quickly learned my way
in the south of France. Sorry to interrupt.
So I was living in Monaco.
Monaco, got it.
Yeah, so I moved from Monaco to São Paulo. Yeah, and then I completed my studies in Brazil, first in a French school, which was a good soft landing into São Paulo, and then I graduated from the American school in São Paulo called Graded, and then as I graduated, I went to college in the U.S. at Bentley University in right outside of Boston, where I studied mathematics and information design, and then started. I've always worked around the technology sector. So right after I graduated from college, I joined a large outsourcing technology staffing group in Boston, where I worked for a few years until I joined the founding team at Majoritas, which was my first venture experience, right? So Majoritas was, and is still today, one of the largest data companies around diplomacy and presidential elections. The company's helped elect over 50 presidents and prime ministers in the world. It's present in every geography you can imagine. And I joined the founding team right at the beginning, so helped scale the company from 4 to 400, and was really a tremendous experience to travel the world and work in shaping different socioeconomic movements and new people coming into power and so forth, and all with the help of technology, right? So that was my first venture experience.
Right. And then you move it onwards to build your first company as a founder officially, right?
Exactly.
You have joined it's almost your first venture now that you are with Velvet, but the first one, you don't have the title, kind of. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I joined very early, but I wasn't the one that created the company, and that all that credit goes to the guy who runs it today, still, who's the CEO, Lucian, who's a phenomenal character and a good friend. But then I left the company in 2016, and then as I left, had a little bit of money in my pocket, and was contemplating if I should join a startup that already existed, or if I should start my own. And at that time, my one of my family members in Brazil has a content production studio, one of the big ones in Brazil that does advertising, but also feature films, series, and so forth, with Netflix and all that in Brazil. And he asked me to think about a business model that could be the evolution of their business, right? And so I went back to the drawing board and put together a business plan, hoping that they would seed fund that business, right? And what I came out of this study was that the future of entertainment is in spatial computing and in augmented and virtual reality. That's how we're going to be consuming content in the years to come. There's a guy who's a Brazilian guy actually that created the HoloLens, which is the new augmented reality headset from Microsoft. And he's actually from Brazil. He's from Belo Horizonte, a guy called Alex Kipman. And he says that we live in a very peculiar time in history. And that in the near future, we're going to realize that we've lived through the only 100 years in history of mankind that we were diminished or reduced to communicating through a screen. That before this, every interaction, social interaction, was in 3 dimensions, and that we're going to be coming back to 3-dimension interactions through and break that screen through augmented and virtual reality. So today we're so accustomed with cell phones and TVs and computers, but when we look at history through its whole time, we're going to realize that that was really a very narrow part of history, right? And that those new emerging immersive technologies through spatial computing are really going to be the next big wave. So with that in mind, I started Arvore. That's a immersive and interactive storytelling studio focused on telling stories, games, narratives through augmented and virtual reality, right? So we transport our audience into these special story worlds where we, bring different games and different cinematic content to the different platforms that exist today. So Oculus, PlayStation, a lot of Chinese and Asian content platforms as well that are emerging and that are already pretty big. So started Arvore with a high school classmate. Actually, he wasn't a classmate. He was a bit older than me, but we were at the same high school in Sao Paulo. I came more from the business background and him from the more of the creative and the tech background. Ricardo is his name. And him and I, along with another third co-founder, Rodrigo, we started Arvore in early 2017. So about 5 years ago. And then the company grew tremendously over the years. We've raised different rounds of venture capital. We've created, now I think we're on our 7th game being developed today. We sell our games to over 65 countries, translated in over 20 languages. We were really at the forefront of this movement, in LATAM even more, but I'd say at a global level as well. And we've won a vast amount of awards, right? Nowadays, all the major cinematic award ceremonies are also giving out awards to VR and AR. So we won a Primetime Emmy-award in 2020.
Congratulations. Wow.
Which was the first time that Brazil ever won any Primetime Emmy in any category. And it was the first time actually that Brazil was ever nominated. So so that was a pretty big push for the local content scene. And that really catapulted us into to a different level into the market, and in the US and in Asia. So that's been really great. We also won the Venice Film Festival, the Biennale, in 2019, which was very important for us. And who knows, maybe one day we'll win an Oscar. That's I think the big the next big move.
So and that's there where you also keep developing your multicultural ties. So I see that you have experience in the US, in Europe, in Asia, in LATAM. how has been kind of your footprint with that business in terms of geographies or regions?
Right. So I've always been my forte is always on the investor relations, fundraising,
Got it.
and I'm more of a 0 to 1 type of person. I'm not the 1
Got
to
it.
10. So I like to get into a business at its ideation level, help it
We
get
complement each
structured.
other.
Oh
Because I've
yes,
been
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah. And yeah, maybe I'll just pass it on to you, after the
Please.
exactly. But yeah, so really at the ideation level, helping the company get structured, hire the initial core team, raise the initial funds, then mature all the way to the product market fit phase, raise a little bit more capital, and then once the company's structured, I'm ready to move on to my next journey, right? And that's what happened with Arvore, right? So Arvore, we've scaled the company in different regions. As I said, the company is really multicultural, both at the team level, but also in the stories we tell. We like to really bring in the Brazilian, stories told in Brazil they don't need to be about the carnaval or the football. Right. There are a lot of great, amazing stories that are told inside of the city of São Paulo. And that's the story actually that we won the Emmy-award with. It's called The Line. It's a love story that happens in the 1920s in São Paulo. It's a love story between a paper boy and a flower girl, Pedro and Rosa. And, there's no folklore in all that. It's just a story that could have happened anywhere else, but it happened in São Paulo. And those are the type of stories that we like to tell. So the multicultural aspect of everything I do and everything I've built is very present in my daily life. And also on the investor side, right? I like to go out and find pockets where people are not maybe looking as much, right? So I become pretty strong in the Baltic countries and countries like Romania, like Estonia, and in the Middle East, right? In looking at
which is
the
growing a lot, it keeps growing a lot.
Absolutely. And and even more now with the price of oil at this time, right? So now that the Western world is going through an economic crisis and a repricing in tech and so forth, I like to say that once the sun is setting in the West, it's rising in the East, right? So now is more than ever the time for founders like myself, like ourselves, right, to be looking at alternative sources of capital in regions that are unexplored or less explored, like the Middle East, like Estonia, like other countries in Eastern Europe. Not talking about Russia, obviously, with its all its complications, but there's a big pool of capital in a country like Estonia, which, funnily enough, has the highest number of unicorns per capita in the world today. Interesting parts of the world for each of the businesses that
and we can see the vibe also, and the energy in Southeast Asia, a region that I'm very passionate about
absolutely
as well.
That
is definitely still with a post-pandemic euphoria. It seems that the Western crisis that we are seeing is not affecting them at all. And
even India, right? I mean, we do a lot of business. We open that's more fast forwarding with Velvet, right? But we opened an office in Bangalore and been wanted to be a local player in India. And it's just amazing to see the growth of the Indian tech ecosystem. It seems like it has not been affected by the crisis. You see, more and more deals in the growth stage, but also in the pre-seed and seed stages. It's really amazing.
So many problems to be solved. Huge market, huge population. So
I'm a
a
big
lot to be
advocate
done.
of solving problems in emerging markets. I think it's that's where the alpha is going to come from in the next few years.
Absolutely.
And it's incredible to see the new Gen Z generation, right? It's there's a study by Bank of America that says that out of the next 10 investors in the world, 8 are going to come from the emerging markets because of the growth of Gen Z, right? So
Wow.
it's incredible to see how all of the investment ecosystem is going to change from a few players with big checks to mass market with small checks, and the democratization of access to different investment classes in alternative investments. So I'm super fascinated about all that.
Amazing. So, and let's introduce Velvet. So your new venture. So, and now in the fintech space. So amazing
Yeah, no, absolutely.
experiences.
So about 2 years, almost 2.5 years ago, I reconnected with an old high school friend as well, different high schools. He was at the American school in Rio, and I was at the one in Sao Paulo. His name is Carlos. And we reconnected. It was the beginning of the pandemic. And he was working very closely with a family office out of Switzerland. And they were looking to acquire secondary positions in US companies that were about to IPO within a year or two. And he came to me with a few names, and I identified some of them that had some friends from back in college times that were early employees in those companies in the US, and that they were looking for some sort of liquidity on their shares. So we partnered up, Carlos and I. He had the money on one side, I had the offering on the other. And we started doing deals in the US, started with Palantir, then we did Kraken, we did Coinbase, Revolut, Robinhood, all with folks that were early employees right before the IPO, were afraid of the lockup on their shares, which means that basically once there's an IPO, usually team members are locked up and cannot sell their shares for usually 6 months to a year. So a lot of people are usually looking for liquidity before the IPO so they can sell and not be at the risk of the macroeconomics of the market. So with that in mind, we joined a few people in each of those companies, $5 to $10 million per company, and started plugging them into family offices in Switzerland. So we did this many times, 6 or 7 times, and then finally we did this with Nubank in Brazil. We bought about a good amount of people at Nubank that were looking for liquidity on their shares. We came in at a good valuation compared to the valuation that was discussed right before the IPO. And we did a great deal, right? We were doing a lot more returns in 6 months to a year than in any other investments that we had done in the past. And then we looked at the maturity of the secondary market in the US versus LATAM and other emerging markets. And just to give you a few numbers, so in 2021, the US transacted about $330 billion in primary transactions in venture capital. And at the same time in 2021, transacted $100 billion in secondary transactions in tech, right? So we're talking about 30% here. While in LATAM, 2021 had $16 billion in primary transactions in VC, and only 100 million in secondary. So we're talking about 0.6% versus 30% in the US, right? At the same time, we see very solidified secondary trading platforms in the US that are helping drive those 100 billion in transactions. Companies like Forge, like NASDAQ private markets. NASDAQ even created a private market division just to trade those shares before the IPO, right? And nothing happening in LATAM, right? very, very little, no trustworthy secondary platform. All of the secondary transactions that are happening in Brazil or in Mexico or in neighboring countries are all happening in an informal way or tied to primary transactions in Series B, Series C, Series D rounds, right?
Right.
So at that point, we said, wow, there's a massive opportunity here to be the secondary trading platform and the secondary partner and the secondary player for transactions in Latin America and other emerging regions, right? So that's how Velvet was born. With a quick PowerPoint in November of last year, we raised our seed round. Was still the high of the high, right, of the market. So also, I had founded other companies in the past. We had some track record of operating this sort of business in the US in an informal way. So very quickly, we raised $3.5 million from funds like GFC and Headline, and also very solid angel investors. One of the co-founders of Nubank is one of our angel investors, and many other ones, co-founder of iFood and other ones joined the cap table. And we started an initial core team, which is what I love to do, build an initial team, build some technology around it, and started, doing deals. So we quickly allocated capital in secondary transactions in companies like Nuvem Shop, like Quinto Andar, like Open, which is the largest neobank in India today, like the new Bank of India. We also invested in Credi Justo, who's now called Covalto, which is the first fintech in the world to own a bank out of Mexico. They're going for their IPO now in the next couple of months. And since then, we've grown the company, grown the team. We also pivoted a little bit when we found our moat to become the liquidity as an HR benefit provider of the ecosystem. So today what we do is that we partner with companies at a Series B and beyond. And for the course of 3 years, we offer their employees, ex-employees, and other stakeholders, early stage funds, angel investors, etc., the right to cash out on a portion of their shares on a recurring manner. So once a year or twice a year through Velvet, they can tap into liquidity, and we take whatever sourcing we have of shares of that specific company, and we can underwrite a portion of it ourselves, or we can bring those shares to the market through our relationship with private banks, multifamily offices, and other investors in the region. So that's how we operate.
That's amazing. And do you think that in terms of one of the main issues I think about tapping into emerging markets is understanding the timing, right? And how do we adapt the platform that you saw and the opportunity that you saw in the US to LATAM? So how were you able to figure out, okay, this is the timing to get into this market, and this market will grow a lot in the upcoming 10 years?
Well, what I looked was, first of all, the size of the market in the US and how it's grown in secondaries in the last 10 years. And the reason why it's grown is because there's a lot more companies at a mature scale, which is the moment now in LATAM and other regions in emerging markets. But also I looked at, there are 200 VCs competing for deals in LATAM today from the early stage to the IPO, right? In the primary side, right? So primary rounds. There are absolutely zero VCs today over $100 million in AUM competing on the secondary side. So we looked at this and we were like, okay, instead of competing with everyone else, why don't we go into this blue ocean, start fishing here as much as possible? Others will come, obviously, but if we can have a first mover advantage, we have the capital to deploy, we build a strong brand, a strong team, then we can soon enough become the largest secondary player in the market. And that secondary market is going to, over the next 10 years, correspond to 30% of the total market. And instead of competing with everyone else, we can act alone, right? for now.
This kind of connects with your investor angle, right? So maybe you were also thinking about how do you differentiate yourself as an angel investor, also with your own fund at Rivercrest. Is it also connected in kind of combining the two ads, being a founder and also being an investor? So of course, it is clear that you are a builder, as you have identified as yourself. So you like to build and you like to help people to build things. Did it all connected with your experience also as an investor, or it wasn't nothing related to that?
Yeah, so I look at the whole ecosystem as a flywheel, right? So, and for us at Velvet, that's very important to understand that our clients of today are providing liquidity to their employees. Their employees, a good portion of them are going to take the liquidity they receive. They're going to become founders themselves.
Good point. Yeah.
Right. Those founders are going to scale their companies up to a point where they might become Velvet clients. And then they'll have a team that they provide liquidity. That team will become founders. And that flywheel is very interesting. And that's what really builds the ecosystem, right? That's what you see with PayPal in the US. That's how we're seeing right now with Rappi, with Loft, with Quinto Andar, with Nuvem Shop, with some of the large tech companies in Brazil. They've already created breeds of new founders that have themselves created breeds of new founders. And that's how we build the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the region. And that's very important. So what was missing here? Sorry. Yeah,
the
yeah,
mafia
absolutely.
effect. Right?
Yeah, the mafia effect, right. And what was missing here was, how can I help the folks that are receiving liquidity on the Velvet side and that want to become founders themselves? How can I help them be successful, right? So that they can become a Velvet client down the road. So I can help them by, maybe putting an angel check there. I can help them by bridging their relationships with other venture capital funds that are very close to Velvet and close to me as an individual. Help them with recruiting, help them find their product market fit. So today I'd say a good amount of time aside from my time at Velvet, also involved with helping founders, go from that 0 to 1, right? So then Velvet can come and help them on their 1 to 10. So that's a big portion of what I do. And that's Carlos and I, who's my co-founder at Velvet, we started Rivercrest, which is I can't really call it a fund because it's too small to be a fund at this point, but we've done 23 investments in the last 2 years together. We're, small, symbolic 20 to 50K checks, where it's a lot more than just the money, right? We want to help out and be as helpful as possible. So Rivercrest is a investment vehicle that looks into financing the operators of today that want to become the founders of tomorrow. And we're in the process of professionalizing the Rivercrest efforts and building an early stage fund as well that will have a bit larger checks and that can be more supportive along the way to those founders. So that's not ready yet, but we'll be announcing it soon enough. And that will be more on the Velvet side than the Rivercrest side.
Love it. And for the ones who are listening, it's also interesting to understand your story and how you were able to leverage your strengths. So kind of finding your ikigai, what I'm good at, what I love to do, and what can I make money off. So in a certain way, adding value to society, having fun doing it, being super strong at that, and creating value. In other words, it's very exciting to understand your story in that perspective and how it keeps going. And I'm super curious to see how the next 2 decades will look like for you, because I can see that you will not stop. given your mindset.
Absolutely. And Velvet for me was the true representation of who I am, right? Because and it took me a long time to get there. And Velvet is a business that was created that is just an extension of who I am, right? And so everything I'm excited about, everything I love doing and I do best is what Velvet does today, right? So different than Arvore, which is a massive business opportunity, probably a larger than what Velvet does today, as because it's going to impact a whole new generation of communication in general through technology. But Arvore was a lot more of me coming in with my business mindset to help the company as a business to grow and to scale, right? But I'm not the core of Arvore, right? The core of Arvore is Ricardo and the team and all the guys that are making those amazing story worlds, right? And those games. While Velvet is really the core of who I am. So it's really exciting for me to be building a business. Then I wake up in the morning and I know that what I'm going to do during that day is what I would do if I had Velvet or if I didn't have Velvet, because that's really who I am.
It's
right?
the best way.
It's really amazing.
Yeah. I like kind of building the ecosystem and making the ecosystem grow. It's super exciting. If you would have to kind of summarize in 2 or 3 topics about what has been some of your lessons as an angel investor and also as a founder, what would you say? And then you can start by one or you can mix them.
Sure.
Just go with the flow.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, number one is routine, right? That's something that I've learned to ingrain in my day to day, and it's what I think is one of the most important parts of being successful as an entrepreneur is for you to have a routine, for you to be able to get organized, to focus 100% of your efforts in that specific slot of time. And then once you're moving on to something else, you forget about the other part and you focus again 100% of your time on that other specific slot. Eat well, exercise, meditate, sleep well. All of that is extremely important, right? So I try to do all those things within 24 hours. And many people say, oh, I don't have time, right? I don't have time to exercise, or I can't find time to meditate, and you do have time. You just need to plan accordingly. Today, I'm also a father of 2, so I also have to fit that into my agenda.
Great. Also scaling up on the family side.
Exactly. So that's also very important. So I'd say one of the biggest lessons I've learned is to be well organized and have a routine. Second thing is trying not to waste time with things that don't really matter, right? So many times during our growth as an individual and as an entrepreneur, we get distracted. We have a tough time saying no. So we say too many yes. And that's just a waste of time, right? So being true to ourselves as what's our mission, what's our vision, what do we want to accomplish, and be able to say no to everything else so that we can stay focused to the things that matter is very important, right? And that's also another lesson that I've learned. I'm no expert, but I've been trying to be better at that for sure. And then the last thing I'd say is giving back. I try to have a give first mentality today, and that's been extremely helpful because in the tech and venture world, it's a lot about helping others in order to help ourselves, and so being able to give back first has been really important for me in the last few years, right? So I try to, again, take some time out of my schedule to help other founders, to see how I can, connect people, and also pledge some of my time to charity. I've been trying to do this more and more. I think that I'm also now in more of a mature part of my professional life where I've already made some capital where I can I can also be less worried about the paycheck at the end of the month, and that's been really important for my sanity. And it hasn't been like this for most of my life, but now that it is, I can start looking at ways of giving back through charity and through things that matter to me and to my family. I try to get my kids involved in that decision making. So I joined something called the Founders Pledge, which is something I really recommend. It's a group of very, very intelligent individuals that have an asset management approach to giving back. And I work closely with them to find ways where I can also bring other people and donate my time and money to different causes. So that's also important for me.
Love it. I love that initiative. I was quite close to it especially in the UK, where it was quite famous.
They're in the UK. Yeah, they're based in the UK. Exactly.
I was thinking also if they were, I think that they are more and more present in the US as well, I imagine, but I think it all started in the UK. At least
You're absolutely right.
Mind. Okay,
yeah,
cool. That's a great initiative, and it shows a lot about the ecosystem and having founders of the largest unicorn tech companies pledging their profits and the value that they create to share a little bit of a piece of the pie with other people. It's really very inspiring. Awesome. And we can see that it's very interesting because also sometimes we forget being an investor in a certain way. It's also being a founder of of an asset, of a fund, and also you need to differentiate yourselves and fundraise, etc., etc. So it's curious to see how you are mixing all those mindsets as we discuss it. I know that you are based in São Paulo. You moved there when you were 11 years old, as you said in the beginning. So there is also a passion or emotional connection with LATAM. I see that you love emerging markets. How do you see the evolution of the ecosystem? I think that you also have a good plane or even helicopter view about the evolution of the ecosystem, and especially with Velvet, you also see that it will grow a lot in the next 10 years.
Well, I think it's we're living in a complete new world nowadays where folks who are graduating from college are choosing to become entrepreneurs sooner than before. That's an effect that happened in the US 10, 15 years ago, and we're seeing it now in Brazil and other countries in LATAM. I think that the growth in capital in the region has really fueled that. People kind of start dissociating now the notion that for you to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to do it all by yourself and nobody's going to be able to support you with capital. That view doesn't really exist anymore. I think that now folks with good ideas, even out of college, are coming out and are being funded and getting enough capital to get their business going. At the same time, it's very difficult to be an entrepreneur in Brazil. It's probably one of the hardest countries to do business with in the ranking, of those countries. There's a lot of difficulties with taxes and being able to hire people, fire people, and so forth. So it's not as friendly, but I think it's evolving. We're seeing new laws, startup laws being passed, a bit like in Portugal and in Europe in general, and in the US and other countries in the region. So I think it's going to get better and better. We're going through a tough moment now in alternative assets in general. God knows how long it's going to take to recover, but I'd like to see the glass half full and not half empty. So I also think that different than other more developed nations, Brazil and LATAM in general is used to volatility, is used to operating in times of uncertainty. And because of that, we've positioned ourselves sooner than the rest in fixing a lot of the interest rates and be able to hold off a little bit more of inflation. So out of all of the global ecosystem of tech, I'd say that emerging countries and LATAM mostly is going to come out of this quicker than the rest. And so I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the next 10 years. I'm very bullish. I think a lot of the problems that still need to be solved in the region are still unsolved. So different from the US, where new tech companies are basically just iterations of other companies that had emerged before. Here in Brazil and the rest of LATAM, we're seeing real innovation, right? To solve people's problems. Same thing as in India as well. And that's what really excites me, right? So fixing problems in infrastructure, in education, in health, in social inclusion, financial inclusion, that's all very exciting.
We saw a huge pile of investment coming from the US and from global funds being more and more interested into LATAM. So, for instance, Andreessen Horowitz, Founders Fund, General Catalyst, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that this will be sustained over time, or they will be a little bit more afraid and come back into their own regions of comfort? Or do you think this is already a trend that will not stop, even with the economic downturn that we are facing at the moment?
No, I think it's irreversible at this point. I think they're here to stay. They understand the opportunity, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that the flow of capital will just continue increasing. It increases and decreases depending on the moment and the investor appetite and the macroeconomics in general. But I think it's here to stay. I think that the foreign investor is a lot less worried about the political scenario here. You know, I was in the US now over the last few weeks and speaking with different investors, and they seem to have priced whether, you know, it was Lula or Bolsonaro, whoever was going to win, and it's Lula now, and it's okay anyways. It would have been okay if it was Bolsonaro as well. And I don't think they see Brazil or the rest of Latin America as problematic as we see it sometimes here being local.
Right. That's a great point. That they make the decision, and they need also, because they are getting more and more LPs and more capital to invest. So it is impossible to them to start only looking into the US or Europe. So they need to expand their geographies, and they need to have in mind when they do that decision that there are risks that they need to take, and those risks are what we have been seeing in the last weeks during the election, and it's normal. It's part of the game. So, and they have committed to the game. So I like the way you see it. So let's go into the last segment of the show, where we ask you kind of free self-reflective questions and free questions about resources that the audience always likes to share what each other are consuming in terms of content. So let's go with the first one. If you would have the opportunity to have a coffee with your younger heads, maybe at the beginning of Velvet, or if you want to go a little bit earlier on your career or on your journey, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
I would say be patient, be resilient. Building great companies and extracting value takes time, and there are no shortcuts. I think that would be the main message to my younger self today. There are obviously all the learnings that I mentioned earlier that are very important, that I would have told myself as well. But I think the main message is be patient, be resilient, stay true to yourself, and try to be the least distracted as possible, right?
Block the noise.
Yeah, exactly. Block the noise, yeah.
or use the kind of the AirPods or even those headphones that block the noise out, especially in times of turbulence, right? So as we do in planes, for instance, that's a great analogy.
Absolutely, that's a great analogy. I'm catching a plane later on today, so hopefully no turbulence.
So, and what are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
Well, I'm proud of having dealt with most of my weaknesses and my major issues of the past. And so about 2.5 years ago, I went into kind of a self journey, a journey into myself to kind of revisit some of the insecurities I had in my childhood, in my adolescence, in my early adulthood. And one by one, I started to correct them, right? So first of all, by accepting them, then by telling people about them, and kind of opening myself and taking those insecurities out of my own body and my own mind, and finally by making a promise to try to never do them again, right? So, and it's incredible. I've become quite spiritual over the years. And that's also something that I've developed later on in life. But it's amazing how all of us, we have, insecurities or problems that we've had to, maybe pretend to be someone we're not, because of those insecurities and so forth. And it's amazing how verbalizing them, telling people about them, accepting them, and saying that you won't do them again, how powerful that is, and how that can unlock a lot of energetic holdups that we might have in our life, and that the moment we put them out, it seemed like it just unlocks it and brings us a lot of good things. So that I would say is the proudest I have been of my journey, is going through those learnings.
Thanks for sharing this. It takes a lot of courage to be public about that, and it's a great example. I do a lot of that work myself as well. Still a lot to be done. But definitely it's super important in a world that we are at the speed of Formula One, especially in the tech world and VC backed world. Sometimes it's very easy to not be able to see ourselves in the eyes and talk to ourselves. So to be always going away, not sure how to find the word to say it, but not being able to meet ourselves and talk to ourselves. That's what you said a lot of times during this show. Stay true.
Stay true
to yourself.
Yeah.
Worst advice ever received?
My God, that probably was my mother.
Don't start the business.
Came from my exactly. Yeah, I think her and it was the same advice that went all the way to maybe 2 years ago, where she always told me, my son, go find a real job, go have something more secure. You need to provide to your family and go look for a salary. Don't dream about things that are unachievable.
And you have kids now, please.
Yeah, you have kids now, so you need to be mindful of them. And I think that was the worst advice she gave me. And thankfully, I didn't. But again, it was the worst advice for me, right? Which doesn't mean it could be the best advice for someone else, right? So it's very individual. But for me, I think that going against the will of my mother, that I would have gone the corporate trajectory, was the best thing for me. And it also felt very good somehow, weirdly, to prove her wrong, right? And to prove her that going after chasing my own dreams and building something out of nothing and achieving that was also the best thing. And quite frankly, maybe I've also made it because I had to prove her wrong, right?
Exactly.
So that was, I think, the worst
Thanks,
advice
man.
I've received was from my mother. Yeah.
So, and now the resources, your favorite book, business or non-business?
So that has to be The King of Oil. I'm not sure if you've read that one, but it's the story of Mark Rich. Mark Rich was the largest trader in the world at one point, and he was responsible for maybe at one point 60% of the oil trading transactions in the world. And that had a lot of geopolitical implications. He became at one point, I think, one of the richest, if not the richest man in the world, but always under the radar. So if you ask anybody who's Mark Rich, 99.9% of the people will tell you they've never heard of him. But yeah, that's a really important book for a lot of my learnings. And so yeah, The King of Oil.
Great addition to our resource list. So favorite movie or series?
So favorite movie, Good Will Hunting. Yeah, as a mathematician and also as the whole story in itself, it's just beautiful. Fantastic older movie, right? But Robin Williams at its peak and Matt Damon, and yeah, fantastic movie. And series, I'd say Succession. Love Succession. Yeah, it's one of the newest ones, but yeah, it's been very entertaining.
And finally, your favorite podcast, excluding this one.
Well, excluding this one, okay. So
much easier for you now.
So I'll give you two from LATAM and two from the US.
Cool.
So starting with LATAM, I really like, it's a Spanish-speaking podcast about startups and tech called Cracks. By a guy called Osvaldo Trava. He's also very close to, I know him individually. He's close to us at Velvet and has been of tremendous help for us in Mexico. And I think the quality of his podcast is really amazing. Also really like FinTech Leaders by Miguel Armaza from Gilgamesh Ventures, English language. And really good quality. Miguel is a very entertaining guy, very savvy. Also had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, had lunch with him a few weeks ago. Great guy. And then from the US, I love How to Get Rich by Naval. Probably, you probably had that answer a few times. But
not yet. It's the first
really?
time in the show.
Really? Okay. Yeah, so
Congratulations.
Naval Ravikant, great mind. Love his book also, The Almanac by Naval Ravikant, another great book to put on the list. But his podcast, How to Get Rich, it's really, really fun and entertaining. And also Acquired by Ben Gilbert, right? That's a really good one.
Ed, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show. I think that you added so much value to the community and to the show. Thanks you so much for making the time.
Mike. Thank you for the opportunity. Cheers.
My pleasure. And to the community, we keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life a little bit easier from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and 10 to 100. See you soon and keep scaling.